And get started. Hi and welcome everyone to this introduction to and demo of the Notable service. Thank you everyone for joining, and to all ADICOS members on the call. It's a pleasure to introduce myself. I'm James Stix, the service manager for Notable at EDINA, which is the Center for Digital Expertise at the University of Edinburgh. So as you can already see here on the first slide, today I'd like to talk to how Notable can help you get your class coding in Glow, and also share a little bit of information about the STEM grant and how we will be working through the STEM grant in order to provide some materials for teaching programming with. So as you can already see here on this first slide, I'd like to talk to how Notable can help you get your class coding in Glow, and how it can provide free access to a tool that has been designed specifically for instructors and teachers and aims to maximize what can be done when coding in education. At EDINA, we've developed Notable with the aim to improve the tools and workflows that teachers and students get when working with data and coding. And at the heart of this is providing the right place and platform for computational thinking, that type of analytical thinking that benefits coding most. And with the STEM grant supporting the development of CLPL materials, continuous learning and professional learning materials, that will be developed between now and March of next year. We're really excited to support the Scottish curriculum in computing science and to be able to combine a space for coding activities and explanations into one seamless learning experience in Glow. So I wanted to start off with giving a little bit of background about what Notable is. And Notable is a platform that exists within a learning journey, really, by providing integration into Glow and giving you and your students one singular place to work with data and do programming in, including features that are specifically designed for education. Notable combines a number of technologies, particularly computational notebooks that I'll describe in some more detail, to create an accessible and interactive place where explanations and coding can be side by side on one website, and work can be securely managed and stored on University of Edinburgh servers based here in Scotland. It has been developed to help you with teaching programming and aligns with the broad general education capacities of the Curriculum for Excellence. So learning about programming and doing programming can happen together on one file with Notable. And instead of having multiple components and platforms, such as your integrated development environment in one place and your Word document or PDF with teaching materials in another place, successful learners can be inspired to learn how to code with Python and R, for example, as programming languages, by allowing an interactive journey to program their own output on the same file. And over this past year, in partnership with Education Scotland, we have developed a number of tutorial notebooks and example notebooks that can be easily downloaded right into Notable. And I'll give you an example of how that looks later on. And these have been tailored specifically for the Scottish computing science curriculum to try and help build confidence in programming, both with tools and content to use in those tools. And so with computational skills becoming an increasing need, both in education and in the workplace, and Bloomberg, for example, calling programmers developers the new bankers just earlier this week, and with the use of Python almost doubling across the world over the past year, Notable can also be an engaging stepping stone on the way to become a responsible citizen in this new age of data that we find ourselves in, that does not seem to be slowing down in any capacity. So I'll just finish off this slide by saying that Notable is available now free of cost to Scottish schools through Glow. And I'll touch on some of the support and documentation available to get it set up for your school. So first off, in terms of how we can use Notable in classrooms, let's ask how to access it and actually start using a notebook on Notable. So Jupyter Notebooks themselves can be used for a number of things. In education, they can be used to organize classroom materials, to store and provide access to reading materials for students, perform live coding, explore and interact with materials, support self-paced learning. You can grade your students' homework with it. You can also solve homework problems if you're a student. And you can make materials reusable to others, and you can submit assignments, for example. Platforms such as Notable, which were initially built from requests by academics, provide this single place to access computational notebooks. And as we have integrated Notable into the Glow system, user authentication happens through Glow safely. So in a moment, I'll show you how to access it through Glow and the app library. To give a last little point on Jupyter Notebooks, they're not new and they're not old. They're about 6 or 7 years that they've been officially in the world. As a technological innovation, the goal of Jupyter Notebooks. Oh, I see there's someone in the lobby. I'm not sure if someone else can admit them, so I'll just quickly pause there and let them in. But as I was mentioning, Jupyter Notebooks have been in existence for a few years now, and have been there to support interactive data science and scientific computing across programming languages by developing open source software with contributors from across the world. Some of our own software engineers at EDINA have been some of the key contributors to the Jupyter project, and many of the results of this project have become core parts of Notable. So in the next slides, I wanted to show you the main view of Notable on a web browser once you've accessed it through Glow. And I will first note that Jupyter Notebooks have 3 clients or front ends that you have access to as a user, and you can enter and edit code and text with them. There is the plain text front end, which we call the console, which you might be familiar with from your own computing knowledge and your own computing device. And it's like a terminal, and a graphical front end as well for visualizations. However, the front end of interest to us, and the one that I'll be showing you today, is the web-based front end, which is what we call the notebook. So to access a notebook on Notable, you'll first log into Glow as usual, and be able to access through the app library and Launchpad. Once you've done so, you will see this guided tour of Notable the first time you log in, which provides an overview of the notebook language selection menu, provides some information on what's available to you, and gives you a run through of the steps involved to get started with Notable. So there you will have been able to choose your language, and then once you've selected the language of preference, which in the majority of your cases would be the standard Python notebook, you will get this desktop-like view of all the files that you have saved on Notable, and any folders or imported notebooks that you have as well. So as you can see, this space can be formatted to your own needs, and you can be organized for your virtual classroom setting, including a tab for running notebooks and assignments. If you're a teacher, you'll also see a tab called Form Grader, which I will show you what it can do in a moment. On the top right, you can also see over there how much of your default 10 gigs of storage you have left in the disk status bar icon there. The plus Git repo button can be used to copy files from our website on GitHub, which is a platform to manage code and files with. And you can also delete notebooks and empty your trash to remove them from your Notable. So it is essentially like having your own computer device inside a web browser page. And you can also upload from your own device or start a fresh new notebook. There's also some support available already to you in terms of how to set up Notable in your school. We have a data protection impact assessment available that serves as a template for schools to use when gaining access to Notable and ensuring they have all the right compliance documentation in place. There's a website that's dedicated to documentation already for Notable, and that's more generally for all educational needs and settings. And there's also supporting materials and a blog post from Education Scotland with some more information. I'll also mention that we've, as I mentioned earlier, developed some specific curriculum materials for computing science that range from Nat 3 to Advanced Higher, which I'll run through in a moment as well. So in this first example I wanted to show you here, this is what you will see when you launch a new blank notebook. And just to highlight some of the features here, you'll see on the top that you can have a notebook name that you can edit to be your preferred name. Then you have the menu bar, like you would have, say, in your Word document. The toolbar is what you would primarily be using in your day-to-day coding with Notable. And this is also a place where you can create assignments. So where you see this, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you see here where it says code, if I clicked on that, then you'll be able to see a list for which there would be a create assignment button. And that is what actually can get your notebook to be an assignment type notebook. So I'll show you what that looks like as well. Here we show an example of having progressed to provide some explanatory text in a notebook. So in a notebook, you essentially have 2 types of cell. And if you look up here on the top, you'll see that there's a markdown menu that you can click on. And it says markdown, but if you clicked on the arrow here, it would drop down and show you some other options. And you would also have the option to have a code cell, which allows for you to do live coding with. And that would show as an extra cell. Say if I wanted to add a code cell between the blue and the green, it would add some space for me to do coding. But what I really wanted to show you here is how with the markdown cell type, you can essentially start formatting a notebook to look the way you like and to have the information that you'd like in a structured way. So for example, in this notebook that we have as an example available to you to teach programming with, you'd be able to set the different colors for cells here to distinguish different types of explanatory text that you'd be looking to provide to your students, for example. So looking to a little bit more of a progression of how to use a notebook. This here now shows you how you've renamed the notebook, for example, to call it My First Plot here. Here's the example of the Jupyter header and toolbar being used, and a markdown cell has been chosen here in the first place to create this title, explanation, and the text for the equation. Here I wanted to show an example of a code cell and how it's setting things up with some needed libraries. So I'll mention here that, as you might have been working with in your current teaching, some libraries and packages might be needed for some programming languages sometimes, but with Notable, there are a number of libraries and packages that are pre-installed, and there's a full list of them available on our website as well, so that you can check to see if you would need any particular libraries and if they're already available. But in this case, here's an example of what it looks like to import, in this case, a numerical analysis library for Python called NumPy, and also the matplotlib and pyplot libraries. Here's an example of another markdown cell, looking down a little bit to where it says the numpy.linspace function creates an array of equally spaced numbers. So that could be seen as being a short explanation for the code that is around it. So right below it, there will be, you can see some code cells that are assigning 2 variables and then making a line plot from that. And so here what we can see is how we've done some Python coding to generate a graph visualization in one notebook in just a couple of steps here. So this is also to give a couple of examples in terms of how extensive you might want to provide explanations, ranging from very colorful and very extensive type of explanatory text cells, such as here, or if you'd like to have more of a lab type computational notebook, which just carries out some code and has the appropriate amount of explanatory text just to know what's happening. You can also do that with Notable. So it gives a bit of flexibility in terms of how you want to code. And next up, what I wanted to show you is the ability to create assignments with Notable. So with Notable, you're able to create a new notebook, and then if you click on either File or the toolbar menu, as I mentioned earlier, you can create an assignment type notebook then, and you can set questions with auto-gradable answers that will be hidden from students for auto-grading later. This will allow for you to develop some curriculum activities and tasks that involve programming in one place, where you can have explanatory text and coding activities side by side, or one above the other, one below the other, and the way we've seen so far with these notebooks. You'll also see that you have the ability to add the number of marks that you'd like, and to set particular points that you'd like to give for an entire notebook and for particular activities within the notebook. And lastly, I'll also touch on how you can manage assignments in one place, because what Notable does is when you log into Glow, it can check if you're a student or a teacher. And if you're a teacher, you'll get an extra tab called Form Grader. And if you click on that, you'll be able to manage all the assignments for your class. And Notable will also have authenticated through Glow, so it will know who your class is and show you the students in your class when you release the assignment to them. So here's an example of how I've already developed some assignment information. I've clicked on the cell toolbar to create the assignment, and you can now see that I have some extra options for each code cell. If you choose auto-graded answer and then give the cell an ID such as mean, then you can start working with the notebook to set, for example, the points in this code cell here right now to test the solution for the first code cell that was worked on. And then scrolling down, instead of being an auto-graded answer, this is now a manually graded answer. And let's say we give it 3 points and call it describe mean. So this is going to be an answer that we've manually graded by the teacher, while this first answer is auto-graded by Notable. So in this first example here, which is being run again, just for reference, you can see how the question is asking the student to compute the mean of a list of numbers given in X. And so what Notable will essentially do is it will recognize that you have put the 3 hashtags in for begin solution and end solution. And between those hashtags, you've already input the solution, but what your student will see will just be blank space to fill in the solution, while Notable will remember the answer in the background and then check against what the student puts in to be able to auto-grade the answer and save some time when you're marking. And so I just wanted to pause there for a moment and actually look in a bit more detail of what's happening there. Because in the background, what's happening is that the hashtags will tell Notable to mark which part is the solution. And so when the student version is generated of the assignment, so when you're in the Form Grader tab that I described And I'll show you in the next slide. When you're in that tab, you can generate the student version of the assignment, and the solution will be replaced with the placeholder that says write your code here for the student. And so in essence, what Notable has done is hidden the solution, but it's remembering it for auto grading later. So you can just click one button and Notable will check through the assignment that your student has submitted and see if they got the auto gradable answer right or wrong, and then give the corresponding points to it. And so moving over to how to manage your assignments. If you're a teacher, you'll see that when you log in, you have this Form Grader tab that I've been talking about right here on the top. And if you click on that, you'll be sent to this Manage Assignments tab here. So you can see here that you can create an assignment by clicking on the Add New Assignment button. Then you can set a due date if you'd like. And once you've done that, what happens next is you can edit the assignment. But when you're ready to then generate the student version, you can generate it by clicking on this button here with the student hat icon. And once you've done that, you'll be able to preview it one last time before you release it to your students. And then once you've released it, your students will be able to see it in the Assignments tab right here. So one of the things that you're able to do as a teacher is to both see how the teacher version of assignments are looking and develop them. And then you can also see what your students are receiving and seeing when you are releasing the assignments to them. And so I'm happy to answer some more questions. I think we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A towards the end about the grader and how it looks, but that's an overview of what creating assignments with Notable looks like in a notebook, and also how to manage assignments with the Form Grader tab. But moving towards how we can also help support the use for Notable and the continuous and professional learning and that we look to do over the next few months with it. Because it's already integrated into and authenticated via Glow, it provides safe and secure access to these computational environments to teach with. And so no external applications or services or software needs to be installed to access it. And because we understand that there is a process to enable access to applications in Glow, we've worked with Education Scotland to make a data protection impact assessment available for you already, and I can share a link to where that is if helpful on the Teams chat after the presentation. And there's also a help desk at EDINA that is available to support for issues when using the platform. And as I've touched on, there are also a number of tutorials and exemplars that are available, which already follow the Scottish Computing Science curriculum and have also integrated some other popular approaches in education, such as the PRIM approach, which actually, Gareth, you kind of introduced us to some time ago as approaches to be using in programming when working in educational settings. And so with that said, I think we're going to have quite a bit of time for questions if you have any. And I just wanted to touch on some of the next steps that we'll be looking for now that we are having this first introductory session to develop these CLPL materials and to work with the STEM grant from Education Scotland to help develop these materials. I'll be sending some survey questions on the Teams chat, and they might actually already be on there because I had to develop them ahead of the conversation to make sure they were ready. And the outcomes of this survey will help inform the initial development of these CLPL materials in terms of assessing the priorities for yourselves as recipients of these materials, of course, and really help inform and give us feedback in what we can do to make these materials as effective as possible for you. The next workshop, which will really be the first official workshop to start developing these materials and gather your feedback, will be more interactive and allow for an exploration of these draft materials and their progression. And we'll also look at some existing specimen examples of examinations in Python and in R, and start assessing how that we could be looking to run some of those materials in Notable potentially, or maybe how we can best use Notable to support working on those materials and those examinations for your students in future. So the last question on the survey that you'll find will be some suggested dates for the next workshop. So please pick your preference there. Thank you very much in advance. And what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing my screen and see if I've missed any initial questions on the chat or anything like that. And then I'll see if there's any questions just to begin with, either on the chat or from yourselves. Feel free to raise your hand or just ask away, and I'll go quiet in a moment. And then from there, we'll be looking to complete the survey, and then after the conversation, we'll gather the feedback from that survey to help organize the next workshop session. So yes, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Hope that has been helpful and informative for you. And yes, feel free to ask any questions now if you'd like. So I think we'll move into a bit of a Q&A session now before looking at the survey. I'm just going to show the chat, see if there's any questions on there. Oh yes, so Gareth. Oh, so very good question, Gareth. You've asked if there can only be one solution per question, and you've given an example. And what I'm going to do is I'll share my screen again, because I actually can show how you can have multiple answers to the same question be shared with Notable, so that Notable can memorize multiple options for a question. So looking back at the MBGrader slides here, as you can see here, this first cell here that has the actual activity for your student includes this solution here. But what's done here is providing some options for the AutoGrader test to run with. So these are some possible options for an answer that a student might give. And what AutoGrader would be doing there is checking for those multiple answers and assigning those points accordingly if they had been input in the way described within that code cell. So hopefully that answers your question, Gareth, but in essence, yes, you're able to set multiple options for answers to allow for your students to set possibly slightly different responses, and for Notable to still be able to read those and to give points accordingly. So thank you, Gareth, for that question. And I think someone might be typing another one, but let's see. Okay, so we have a question. How long does it take to set up a simple program to be graded? I think my answer might be that it depends on the definition of what a simple program might be. We have some academics who spend significant amounts of time setting up an assignment to be graded because it includes multiple autogradable cells and it can become quite complex. But for, let's say, a simple program that might have the 5 points that we were looking at in the example assignment on the slides, and that should usually take between 20 minutes or half an hour to develop. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, if you're trying to achieve a more complex numerical type of analysis, it might take a little bit longer if you have more options for answers, or if you're looking for a more simple program with just one option for an answer, that wouldn't take very long at all. So in essence, it will really depend on what your use case might be in terms of how long it might take to set up a simple program. But given that it would be a simple program, it shouldn't take very long at all. And then once you've set it up, it means that you can click on AutoGrade within the FormGrader tab once your students have submitted that assignment, and it will automatically be able to assign an answer to them or a score to them.
Do you know, I'm typing here. I'm just going to ask you the question. It saves me typing.
No, go ahead. I wasn't sure.
I was wondering, it was me that was asking about the length of time it takes to set programs up. I'm just thinking in terms of really simple ones to start with kids. But am I right in assuming then you can reuse them for different classes for the following year? So once you've got them, you don't have to do them again?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So once you've got them, you'd be able to download that notebook, and then that notebook is yours to share with anyone that you would like in terms of your classes and your students as appropriate. So yes, assignments are reusable in that way, and that you can copy and paste them no problem, and Notable will be able to read them, you know, at every point. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of the length it might take to run a simple program and developing it, but also the transferability of that assignment. So yes, you're definitely able to create that assignment once and then transfer it quite easily, either in the notebook or just specific activities that you would like to mix and match with different notebooks. So that would be really up to you in terms of how you would like to set that up.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. So thank you, Mrs. Patterson, there for that question.
James, I sent you through the past papers for computing science. I think for Nat 5 and higher. I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at it. The kind of format of some of the questions, did that look okay to be implemented in Notable in terms of the structure, and so you could actually put the question in and get the kids to answer?
Yes.
Because obviously the exam questions use the SQA reference language, but I suppose you could change that to Python, or even, you know, put a graphic of the reference language in and get them to code in Python what it resembles in the reference language. Is that what you were looking for? Because I think you were looking for examples. Somebody for the, am I right in saying from maths had given you something to do with a coursework, or was it data science? Or
yes. Yes, what you're referring to, Gareth, are a number of specimen papers that you shared with us, and thank you so much once again for sharing those with us, because they've been really helpful in helping us understand already how they can be adapted and used with Notable for teaching. To answer your question, with the ability to develop explanatory text in Markdown, using the same language and adopting that language shouldn't be any issue at all, because you'd just be able to use that same text if desired, and then weave the code cells in between, right? So you'll be able to have the tasks or questions set out in those example papers that you sent to us, and then have the SQA explanatory text or descriptive text, or just official examination text on there as well where needed. I might ask a question back to you in terms of from your thoughts of how these might be adapted. Do you think that the exam papers could become essentially fully adopted into a Notable file, or would you envision more a kind of sometimes for some types of activities it would be more suitable to use Notable, but the rest can also be done elsewhere?
I think it would be worth giving it a go, because obviously they can type plain text answers in, and you know that it can either be auto graded or I suppose I could go in and mark them anyway. So it'd be good to give it a go and see. But I just think what it would mean is the pupils would be able to code directly into, let's say, the exam paper and run it and try it, and you know, if it doesn't work, obviously they'll know there's an error in the code, and again it'll give them another chance to try that out. So just it gives them a different way of answering exam type questions, rather than sitting maybe with a paper copy that we've got to handwrite. The ability to interact with the code, I think, would be quite a good thing. Certainly, you know, for revision, prepping them for exams, tests, that kind of thing. I see George has put a question there about trying it out. I was going to say, I'm hopefully there with our DPIA. I've still not got access yet to the full system, but I'm hoping to get access in time for our higher software development unit. And what I was hoping to do was, I think we've got, somebody can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, do we have 3 courseworks plus a specimen coursework up to this point? I think we do for the new hire. And and I was hoping to try and put the software development sections into Notable. And again, it'll give, obviously you can get the narrative above a coding cell, and they can type the Python code underneath as part of the solution. So I'm hoping to do that, but obviously I'll need to get access to it, and I'll run that with my higher classes and see how they get on.
Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what anybody else thinks, if that would be a good resource to, because I'm sure we all give them past papers and past courseworks to work on. I'm going to try and get it in this format.
Yes, thank you, Gareth. I think I might have lost you for a second there, but I think I heard most of what you were saying. So thank you for sharing that information, Gareth. And I've shared a link to a resource from Education Scotland that had some information on the DPIA and some frequently asked questions that we've been receiving as well in setting up access to Notable. Once the DPIA and any compliance documents that might be specific to your school or local authority have been completed, every time you access Notable, you would be able to access through Glow by logging in and then going to your app library or your Launchpad, and you'll be able to see it on there. I can show you what that looks like for us, but it'll be the developer view. So it'll be kind of the way you will access it normally, but it'll just have some slightly different looks on the tabs. So maybe that would be helpful, Mr. Wiley, just to have an idea of what that looks like.
Yeah. Even I've never been through the DPI.
I think you muted yourself, but I can't hear you. Still not coming in.
Sorry, hear me now? No.
Oh, now it is. Yes, now I can hear you.
Right. Okay. I haven't had to request access to any other applications, so I haven't been through the process before.
All right. So maybe Gareth, is that something that you could maybe speak
to? I was going to ask that. So I've got our authority DPIA to fill in, so it's been back and forward slightly just now. So I still don't have access where I could, run it and have the pupils on it. I was going to ask James if this is possible. Obviously, the DPIA very much hinges on storing pupil information at the moment, which seems to be obviously why it's very much important. Is there any chance that you could create, like some guest logins just for teachers that want to use it, just to play around, try things out? Because you might find that there's a bit of a time lag between getting the DPIA rubber stamp with their authority and getting access. So, for example, if I've not got that yet, so I'm still waiting on access. The only real chance I've had to play around with it was the developer login that you gave me previously. So, somebody like George maybe appreciate like a guest account to play around, dabble with it. Is that what you're thinking, George?
Yeah, just to see if it's going to map out for us, before we put in a lot of time and effort into it to try and see what it is. And as I say, I don't know how difficult. I've always found, like North Ayrshire in particular, difficult to get anything about Glow done quickly.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and thank you, Gareth, for your suggested answer, because I think that would be a very positive option to move forward with, to be able to enable that. So I'm just going to double check with Education Scotland and with my colleagues at EDINA how we could best do that in terms of providing access to say a certain number of developer accounts or of beta accounts, as we did with you, Gareth, and that would mean having access straight away as an individual user to the environment while these approvals take place, and yes, as you say, might take a little bit of time.
Just as a side point from that, our maths department were quite keen to use the R language built within it, Again, I don't know. Our school runs application of maths course. I would imagine some other schools here tonight may run that as well. And I think they've got to do statistical analysis, and I think it's certainly quite a common language that maths teachers have been training to use or are currently using. So they're quite keen to get on board as well. So it's maybe something to check with your maths department as well, because they would probably appreciate access as well.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. So we will be also working to develop CLPL material specifically aimed at uses in math and with R&R Studio. Just to reiterate how Notable can provide access to these environments. When you log into Notable, you'll be able to choose whether you want a Python-based notebook, or if you're familiar with R and the RStudio user interface, you can also choose from that list to access RStudio from there. Oh, great question. Is Notable only available through Glow? So right now it currently is. It's integrated into Glow, and that's the sole point of access that we have for schools at the moment. But in future, it would be definitely something of interest for us to investigate how we can make it available alternatively. Graham, could you maybe share a little bit of information in terms of how you access external applications, just to get maybe a bit of an idea of how that would look for you if you're not part of a local authority or have access to Glow necessarily?
So can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if we've got access to Glow or not. I'm at work at an independent school in Ayr, Wellington, and I think I've mentioned it in the past to our IT manager, and I think the answer was no, we don't. Really, I think we just sort of subscribe to the services out with Glow, because we use G Suite, for example. So I believe we've got our own sort of subscription and account for that based on the organisation.
Okay. So without going too much into the details of how the technical side works, Notable can be integrated into educational systems to authenticate users in that way, so that it can help to organize virtual classrooms as well, like that. So it would be maybe it might be of interest for us to have a separate conversation, Graham, in terms of what the setup might look like for your school. And
yeah, sure. Yep.
So maybe I'll follow up separately if that sounds good with you, just to
get
no
problem.
And Lynn,
Hi.
I see you have your
Yeah,
hand up.
I was just gonna come in that. Graham, I know a lot of the access rules around Glow changed last year due to the pandemic and whatnot, and I know access was given to people for certain things who were not part of just the general school system. So I'm going to check that for you and come back to you. I'll probably come back to James on it and he can feed back to you about that. But I know that there were ways round that access to Glow. I'm not sure if that applies to independent schools. I would need to check that out, but I will do so and I'll come back to James on it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynn.